И, моля, Божо.
I will be speaking in English because we have English guests, and this is the keynote, so that's what the organizers asked me. So I will be speaking about e-governance and what are we trying to do with it, and what's the progress, and what's left to do. And the clicker isn't working. Okay. So I am currently advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister, Rumiana Bacharova, and I'm basically advising on e-government, electronic identification, everything IT related. Here is the proper time to say that without her political back, and if I may use the pun, her political spine, without that, this wouldn't be possible. So she's very good in that. Also, another thing regarding tomorrow's elections and referendums, I hope that my talk doesn't influence you in any way on your decision tomorrow. I am a software engineer, so I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not in politics. I'm just a software engineer who happens to be currently advising on those issues. And by advising, I don't mean just giving my peace of mind, but also actually doing things, as we will see. Okay. So let's start with what is e-government. Well, the general view is divided. People think, well, it's more e-services, it's more electronic way for the government, for the citizens to communicate with the government. Well, actually, it is the government not bothering us with its stuff. The government has a lot of functionality, a lot of functions, and the less we care about them, the better. E-governance is making it easy for us to request stuff from the government, because it's not only there to regulate some matter, it's also there in some cases to help us. And e-governance should make it easier for us to request that. And also, as a side effect, it should optimize the internal workflows and make it more cost efficient. That's not something we see on the outside, but it's something that e-governance is also. And also, it's making the government predictable and transparent. So, what is the current government doing? Why is it doing it? Is it properly motivated? Are there some shady schemes behind it, or everything is as presented? The favorite example about e-governance and how it can change the current situation. Currently, citizens are delivering paper. We are delivering one certificate from one institution to the other. Well, when an institution issues me a merit certificate, well, I know whether I'm merit or not. And I know whether I've been tried or not. It's the other parts of government that don't know. I'm currently a courier between two administrations, bringing paper from one to the other. So these certificates must die. They are a legacy from the paper world. It wasn't possible to transfer information bits and bytes back then, but now they can die. They don't die because of inertia, but they can be replaced by real-time queries to the source of truth databases, which we already have. Yes, the administration is slow. That is maybe a virtue in some cases. It is one of the things that I'm unhappy with myself as well, that the things that we did in the past year and a half could have happened faster. They didn't because of many factors, but yeah, that's the slow movement of a big structure. Actually, if it was a huge company with 100,000 employees, like the administration, probably the pace would be similar. So, yeah. By the way, speaking of stamps, this is also a legacy from the past, and we are now actively considering a way to get rid of them. So stay tuned about that. So what are we doing? And by we, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just me. We are a team of 5 or 6 highly motivated and skilled people, and we are doing electronic governance, electronic identification, open data. Now, electronic governance goes hand in hand with administrative reform. If you want to do electronic governance, obviously you have to reform the administration. So the two things are very much tied. And we don't do e-voting because that's a prerogative of the Central Election Commission. But I participated in an expert working group in Parliament, and we will also be helping the Central Election Commission with the technical details, so that's why there's an asterisk there. So what was the status quo, and to an extent is at the moment? The administrations are silos. Each administration has its own database. It has been built before the era of web services, probably. So, and even if the system has a web service or something to integrate with other systems, the administration that holds the data considers it their own, and they do not want to give it to others. And this is how you end up in the situation where you have to carry certificates because the other administration cannot just query in real time. So this is almost no integration, few web services. In many cases where some progressive administrations try to integrate with each other, that happens with overnight replication of whole databases. You just get one database and dump it in the other end. That obviously leads to some problems. Sometimes it's not overnight, sometimes it's monthly, and you get stale data. Poor quality software. That's probably something quite obvious to everyone, that the software that the government is getting is usually of very low quality. There are exceptions, but the majority is poorly built, just not following best practices, with insufficient security, etc., etc. There was no proper, easy way to identify citizens online. Now, when you go to in person to the administration, you show your ID card. When you go online, how do they know that this is you so that they can give you some services? Well, it used to be done using qualified electronic signatures, which is borderline legal. It's still being done with identification codes, which are not very secure. And each administration issues its own identification code, which is basically a password. So there is no standard way that I can go to a government institution and say, okay, this is me. There wasn't such a thing. And when previously there was investment in e-governance, what was done was digitizing paper processes. So you have a paper process accepting documents, then sending the documents to one directorate, sending them to another directorate. Then all of that was transformed into an electronic form, ignoring the fact that some of these steps could just be automatic. A person didn't have to check something exists in a database because the system can check that it exists in the database. This analysis wasn't done. There is little understanding of data. When we started and are implementing our open data initiatives, the understanding of data in the administration was quite crude. Basically, something on a PDF file was considered good enough data. It's not. And the last thing that probably was one of the roots of OEVO was the lack of coordination. There was no central or whatever body that could horizontally do e-governance policies. It couldn't say to one administration, okay, let's all have a single way to identify citizens. Let's all have a unified look and feel for our websites, if we have any, of course. So what's the first step? Well, we decided, let's change the law. It's simple. A side note here, as I'm a programmer, turns out that there is a lot of similarity between lawmaking and programming. Both are pretty well structured. A law has very well-defined sections and chapters. It uses a semi-formalized language, so basically you can use a bunch of words in a proper context and they mean exactly one particular thing there. There are even, in a way, control structures like if and for each. If something is the case, then this norm applies. And for every citizen who is under 18, for example, this thing applies. The most interesting thing is there are diffs. Actually, the way the law functions, the current version of the law is actually the original version plus the applied diffs of every amendment that has happened to the law. So that this is pretty similar to what we're used to. And it turns out that programmers and IT people like me and my colleague that that actually carried out this effort, are sort of good at lawmaking. We make well-structured laws and that are easy to follow and understand. So the Electronic Governance Act that we decided to change had a few major points. We created a new state agency for electronic governance. Now, this is a new administration, of course, it doesn't sound too fancy, but it is supposed to have this horizontal control and coordination. It is supposed to be the body that does e-governance. There will be a public register of all projects, and each project that any administration does will go to that register and to be public, open data, so that we can follow what money are spent on what projects by the government everywhere. The amendments that we actually, an agency is a way that most European countries that are ahead of us in terms of e-government have done it. Estonia, the example that I'll probably be mentioning a lot today, they have a state agency for e-governance, and so do many other European countries. So we also decided to sort of follow their lead. The law mandates that everything should be integrated. That used to be the case before. Obviously now we strengthened a bit this requirement. And the important thing, which I talked about 2 years ago, is now a fact. Every project that the government procures should be open source. It should be developed as open source, not just dumped at the end of the project. It should be developed as open source. And obviously every system should have open data interfaces, so that if you want to see what is the data inside a system, you go there and do a query and you get a JSON or XML or CSV. Also, there's just a tiny story there about the gov.bg domain, which kind of shows the hard ways of passing things. So we said, okay, most countries are using the their country TOD, gov.uk, gov.ro, gov. whatever. And we said, okay, why not gov.bg? And we sent first an official letter to register BG. They said, well, our rules do not allow having top-level domains being used as second-level domains. We checked ICANN, nothing there like that. So we sent them an official letter asking them to revise the rule so that the government can use this user-friendly domain, because even I sometimes mistype government.bg. And they said no. Yeah, why? So what we did, we did put in the law that the government has the right to use gov.bg, which was basically sudo give me gov.bg. And now the government owns it. Currently, not all subdomains are migrated to that, but gov.bg at least works. Now, speaking of certificates, the law now says that you cannot simply request a certificate anymore, and you shouldn't. If you have the technical capability, and we will give that pretty soon, you have to use an electronic way to obtain the data. The integration is mandatory, and the data should be obtained from primary registers. How? Well, each register has already, some of them, or will have after we upgrade them, web services that expose all the necessary functionality. For example, if someone wants to check whether I'm married, they shouldn't ask me to bring a certificate. They should just query the population register and see if my marital status is married or not. They can ask, am I married or not, or what is his marital status? There can be these Boolean queries that you don't need to know the data, you just need to know whether someone is married or not, or whether someone lives in Sofia or not, or whether he's over 18 or not. The idea is not to rely on something centralized. Architecturally speaking, when you have so many databases, to have an ESB is kind of risky because you have to centrally manage all the complexity. Initially, it would be okay. You get a contractor, he will configure all the transformations inside, and then 2 years later, when half of the laws have changed and half of the interfaces have changed, everything will become hell. So currently, we have sort of an ESB, but it will be used, of course, but we also try to make it more distributed, so no relying on a single point like that. Now, of course, I'm already sensing the question, okay, if any government institution can read any data about you from any register, isn't that a risk? Well, it is. So before accessing that data, each administration would have to check, well, each information system that releases the data will have whether the requester has the legal grounds for access. This is or will be in a centralized database which has all the electronic services, all the actual services, and all the data field by field that is requested, and next to the field, the legal grounds, meaning Article 6, Sub-Article 7 of the law for something. Because of that, I have the right to store and collect your marital status, so here is why I'm getting it. And in addition to that, there is a mandatory audit log. So each of these operations is stored centrally, could not be erased, obviously, and the citizens will be notified if anyone reads their data. Of course, if you go to some administration and request something and then you get an SMS, okay, someone just read your marital status, okay, that's fine. I just was there and requested a service. If you're sitting at home, haven't visited the administration for 8 years, and suddenly you receive a notification that someone read your, say, properties, or well, they should be public. So probably someone read your brothers and sisters or where you live, and that's probably not okay. Maybe some civil servant decided to check on you. Maybe this is your neighbor who wants to check whether you're actually married to that woman whom you live with. And these are problems. I mean, it is a privacy concern, and we will try to address it both legally and technically so that such things that don't happen. And in Estonia, they did happen once or twice. 2 or 3 people went to jail. They're not happening anymore. As I mentioned, open source is now the law. This doesn't mean that everything will be Linux and LibreOffice and that Microsoft will die. This means that when the government procures something custom for its needs, and basically it has very custom needs because most of the information systems stem from laws, and the laws are pretty custom. So it must be open source from day one. It must be on GitHub. Well, it must be on a state-owned repository, but it will be mirrored to GitHub. And what we will publish today as an ordinance to the law, it will only permit OSI and FSF-approved licenses. So no fancy stuff that sort of allows you to reuse things, but not quite. What would that lead to? Well, hopefully, and I had a whole talk about that 2 years ago, it may lead to higher quality, because companies will no longer try to be sure that nobody will actually ever see that. And I've seen pretty bad quality software around in these 2 years. It will mean reuse. Currently, some even very common components like electronic signing in the browser or exchanging documents with another system, all of that, each company does it themselves. That obviously wastes time and money. This could be reused. These components could be extracted and reused across companies, across organizations. Even whole systems can be reused, and we'll see one example of that later. Security is a very good question, whether open sourcing in such a way would increase security or would it be more risky. Currently, the security is security through obscurity, or as put more recently, security through prayer and optimism. I have personally patched SQL injections and other issues that have been lying there for years, no company there to support it, no company there to fix it. Once it surfaces as a problem, everyone is running and screaming around, we have a problem. Well, probably this could be avoided early on in the process. And it will probably lower the cost, because you will know what was built. When the government ships, when a company ships some software, the government doesn't actually know whether that was built from existing components or the company actually wrote a database, a search engine, and a CMS, or it just bunched a few together. There will be, of course, practical challenges, and we are already facing them. And some companies and some administrations don't realize what is the extent to which the law applies. Should we open source Microsoft the database server, for example? No. Should we only require open source databases or software in general? No. If there is a cheaper and if there's a cheaper paid proprietary alternative, obviously you could use it, but you should calculate the total cost of ownership, because if someone sells you a proprietary software for $1 million today and making an open source one would require 3, but then the company charges you $2 million every year, then the total cost of ownership is obviously worse for you. Another thing that the law specifies, and I've personally put that there, is the sort of called experts program. The agency has to organize a program for attracting sort of a freelance way experts to be hired by the state agency. It doesn't have to be full-time. It doesn't have to be on a labor contract. We will see the details. As someone recently joked about that, it's an IT conscription. You go to do some work for the government for mostly for free, because compared to the market salaries, that wouldn't be anything to entice you with. Also, we would promise a lot of bureaucracy. That is something you have to start with in the beginning. But also, this would be a chance for impact and a way for you to actually help the environment. I mean, not the environment, but in a more abstract way. And we'll try to make it flexible so that you can work in the evenings. You don't have to be there at 9 a.m. in the morning, more like a developer type of thing, not administration type of thing. It will be like the 18F thing in the UK, in the US, where after the crash, the failure of healthcare.gov, which was given to, I think, IBM, after 2 or 3 years they developed and then they deployed and it didn't work at all. So Obama called some people from Silicon Valley, they sent some experts, and in a couple of months they built something together that's working as a lean startup inside the government. So we'll probably do something like that, and these people will be able to work on particular projects like the electronic identification or electronic voting even, not necessarily coding on that, but working with the company that is performing the actual implementation, maybe even helping them reviewing their code. We'll see what the policies will be. Also, there will be the state-owned enterprise, that is called state system operator, which will be able to give a bit higher salaries, and again, the people there will work on government projects. But that will be just sort of a regular company. Now, an ordinance is the legal act that is right below, like underneath the law. It doesn't need Parliament to be approved, but it goes just to Council of Ministers. And what the ordinance to the e-Governance Act is going to be like, and we will publish the version for public consultation today, actually yesterday when it was published. The ordinance will define the requirements for web services and how they should basically be structured. We won't be publishing XSDs and JSON schemas in legal text, obviously, but some general guidelines about that. It will be very strict on the audit trail that should be left in each register. So each database in the government must have an audit trail that's unmodifiable. You cannot just delete or modify an entry in it. And that will be guaranteed by, say, hashing or log chaining or whatever means we see fit for each particular case. I already mentioned the privacy aspect. Nobody could just read data. Even we're thinking of making it impossible for administrators to do select queries and just bulk export everything. There are ways to do that in some databases. And some aspect is included there that's probably unheard of so far, and that's usability. It will be, everything should be accessible through mobile, which obviously is now the way people use the internet. And Not only that, but also the processes will be optimized, because if we have the paper processes on mobile, it won't be that good of experience, because UX is not only how good it looks, but it's also how easy it is to use, obviously. A lot of security there, and the most important thing actually is that all of these principal requirements that are put in legal text and probably hard to read are now in a technical specification template that is part of the ordinance, so it's actually part of a legal text as an annex, and it is a sort of a 30-page document that specifies all the requirements that we have come up with throughout the years that are problematic currently, and that the administration doesn't necessarily have the expertise to put them in their technical specifications. For example, what do you do with digital signatures? Do you sign the hash of the document, or do you send the whole document to the smart card? Obviously the hash, but in some cases it's not the case. Or do you follow OWASP recommendations for web security? Well, some companies haven't heard of OWASP. Do you cache your data? Because when you have millions of real-time queries to a database, it will probably crash. So you have to use a distributed coherent cache. And all of these things, architectural, security, usability, etc., are in that specification, and the administration can just get it, fill in the blanks, what is their business requirement for that system, and publish the tender. And then the company that's implementing it should follow all these best practices and rules and probably end up with a better result in the end. And actually for this ordinance, as it will be published today, I will ask you to review it, including the template, and give feedback, because that's the point. We have an e-governance roadmap. It is, yeah, the whole name is actually longer. I even created a generator for administrative documents. The e-governance roadmap for implementing the strategy of e-governance, etc., etc., etc. Essentially, that's what we are building till 2018/2012. It's split into two sections. The major projects that should start early next year is rebuilding and upgrading all major registers. Because you've seen the commercial register, it has been good for the time when it was built. That's 10 years ago. The population register has been built even before that. It uses 4GL, which, yeah, is a legacy technology. So all of these registers will be either rebuilt completely or upgraded to a more modern architecture, to a web services-oriented architecture, to a more secure architecture and implementation. One thing that we decided to do, and it evolved throughout the years, is a register as a service. Because currently, these major registers that I mentioned, the population, the commercial register, etc., they are the big ones, and they have a lot of transactions to and from, but there are also hundreds and even thousands of other registers that should be kept by the administration. And probably around 40% of them are on paper. Another 40% are probably on Excel sheets. And an Excel sheet doesn't have, of course, the audit trail, okay? It doesn't have automatic backups. It doesn't have open data, even though you can export it as CSV. That doesn't happen automatically. And a lot of other issues like that. So we decided to build a register as a service. We create one single project that is deployed centrally in the government cloud, and each administration configures what fields, what documents, and what is the basic process for entering data into the register. And without any programming effort and without any millions spent, it now has a register, not only a register, but one that complies to all the necessary requirements for open data, open source, security, usability, etc., etc. So hopefully that would reduce the number of Excel sheets and paper-based registers. And I've seen those. I mean, we went to one open data event once, and someone from a small municipality gave me a big sheet of paper, and she said, "This is our local property register. Here you go, open data that." Okay, point taken. The EID project, which I'll talk about in a minute, is also on that roadmap. The government cloud. Now, currently, each administration has its own servers, and they are usually in some closet or some basement, or in the worst case scenario, just a desktop computer under the desk of some IT. The hardware that has been bought throughout the years is underutilized, under 2%, under 5% in most cases. So we have a lot of hardware scattered around the country that is practically unused. So we plan to make one centralized place where an administration can even donate its own hardware. It will be installed in a proper location with air conditioning, with proper electricity assurances and stuff like that. And it will then just provision virtual machines as if it was Amazon. Other things in the roadmap, including developing new e-services, improving existing e-services, obviously, and e-voting. A bit about the electronic identification. Now, I'm jumping a bit on the topics, but this is kind of an overview with a bit of technical details of what we're trying to do. We, of course, introduced a new law and an ordinance to it. So what is electronic identity in the first place? This is a way to be represented, to make sure that this is really yourself when you present yourself to the government online. This is basically the equivalent of showing your ID card, but on a website rather than to a lady behind a desk, a cashier. It is considered a key enabler. So you cannot have e-governance without electronic identification. If you can't identify your citizens online, how do you give them services? How do you give them information? You can't. Current e-services sometimes include doing parts of the step online and then physically going somewhere to either get something or prove that you're yourself. This is obviously a no-go. It is mandatory for all systems. So even though currently systems support identification codes, qualified electronic signatures, etc., the new scheme will be mandatory for all systems. It is a de facto single sign-on for all the government systems and municipal systems as well. So whichever website owned by the administration you go, you should be able to log in there and use services with your EID, and we'll see what that amounts to. It is privacy preserving again. It will, of course, follow all the rules for audit logging and notifying people, but also during the authentication, you will be able, the service provider, the one that's giving you services, will request particular pieces of data to the identity provider that we will have, and you'll be able to select, okay, I want to enclose this and this data, but this one I do not want to give. So it's basically like, well, we can put it like a Facebook login for the government, but with more privacy control. Now, how would that be implemented? It's a good question, because when I mentioned key enabler, Estonia again was the example here, that the ID card, the electronic ID card was the key enabler there to drive their e-governance forward. And they had it on a smart card, which was their national ID card. In comparison, Finland made it optional and you had to pay some 30 euro for it to get it. And Finland actually introduced it before Estonia. But because Estonia made sure that it is so widespread and easy to use, 15 years later, Finland is thinking of scrapping its EID program and also taking e-government solutions from Estonia. So this alone, well, there are of course other factors, but this alone was a very important factor to e-governance. So what we proposed, and this is one of the laws that hasn't yet passed, that is the National Documents Law Act, and we proposed to put it in the ID card in an opt-out fashion. So you get it by default unless you explicitly don't want to get it. This way we try to ensure this widespreadedness that works for Estonia and see whether it would work for us. Obviously we have the option to get it on a separate card, maybe on a bank card even, maybe on your current qualified electronic signature device, whatever. There will be probably, because the EID is owned and issued centrally by the Ministry of Interior, but there can be multiple front offices and multiple companies that actually issue the card. So instead of giving you a card, they can just personalize it on an HSM, which is a server-side smart card, and you just access it through other means, so identifying to the HSM via passwords, for example, and then identifying to the government with using that certificate. The other options that we're considering, I think are better, is a split key. So you have something on your mobile phone, and you have something on HSM, which is the two parts of the key. And when you identify, you combine those, and this is how you confirm that this is really you. Another thing that we're considering is using the hardware-backed key store. Now, since recent versions of Android, there is the hardware-backed key store, which is more secure than just placing a key store in your, on your phone. It is currently a bit fragmented. It doesn't have support for all Android phones. I think in iOS it's a bit better. But it's something that we are investigating, and for sure it will indicate that you have used this a bit lower level of assurance device, because it's not certified as EL4+, it's EL2, for example. This is a certificate for the security of a secure storage device. The point of these devices is not to allow anyone to read the private and extract the private key, because if the private key leaks, then your identity may be stolen. Smart cards guarantee that. Hardware-backed key stores almost guarantee that. There are some known hacks which we'll have to consider. And we got to open data. Now we have the open data government.bg, still no open data gov.bg, and there are 1,300 datasets roughly at the moment, and few of them are of very high quality. We have to admit that. There are a lot of Excel sheets, which of course you can convert to CSV, but still it's tedious. There are even some PDFs. We explicitly made it in all the legal text and all the instructions that PDF is not a proper format, and still it happens. They'll learn. The important data that I think is of higher quality is the commercial register, which is basically an XML of all the history of company registrations since 2007. And there's the procurement register, which has all the public contracts, the government procuring something with some company since 2011, I think. And it is in CSV. Now, how did we open these things? Well, I went to the particular administration and worked there with the staff. Some of them very helpful and very competent, actually, in their domain. And we wrote some SQL queries in one case. I wrote an anonymizer for the commercial register because it contains some personal data in the XMLs that the system exports that shouldn't be just allowed publicly because of privacy again. But I wrote an anonymizer that replaces each personal identifier, each address, everything that can be personally identifiable information so that it can be opened. And I built other tools, the XOS to CSV tool that they can just upload their XOS in it to spit out CSV, because surprisingly, Excel is pretty bad at generating CSV. If you select save as CSV, it is semicolon separated rather than comma separated, and it is not UTF-8. It just doesn't work with UTF-8. I then wrote an auto-uploader tool that they can install on their system, on their machine, and it will regularly just get an Excel file converted to CSV and upload it to the Open Data Portal without them doing anything. It was a bit hard to make a Java installer for Windows, but it worked. The result of all that effort, the result of our legal effort, as well as the result of these particular tools that I've personally built, is that we're rising in multiple indexes. The Open Knowledge Foundation Index, we are now, I think, 16th. We used to be 56th before. In the European Union, we used to be in the last 2 or 3 places. Now we are top 8. So this is paying out pretty quickly in terms of at least indexes. The steps, obviously the first one was to make it legally required to have open data and build these simple tools for them to work with it. But the second step is that every system that will be built, and that goes back to the template that I mentioned, will have automatic open data interfaces, so nobody would actually have to do anything manually. And the data literacy problem. As I mentioned, there is little understanding, not only in the administration, but also in journalists, in the society in general, about how do we read and interpret data. And some of the administrations are reluctant to release data because it can be misinterpreted. And that's a fair concern, although I don't support it. But yeah, in general, we have to increase the data literacy, and there are some programs already, at least in the administration, to teach them about how to work with data, what is open data, what is, well, we cannot talk of big data in a country of 7 million people, but still there are some examples of medium data, let's say. And we got to electronic voting. Now, I realize that's a very interesting topic, which I spoke about last year. The law is already in place. Last year I talked about the technical side and what would be the requirements to such a system. I happened to be in the working group in Parliament that drafted the legislation, so all the requirements that I talked about last year are now in the law. So it should be open source. It should allow verifiability to see whether you have properly voted, whether your vote was counted as it was cast, without that revealing your actual vote. So you cannot prove to someone how you voted. It will use the EID for authenticating the voter. It will have some technically guaranteed secrecy of the vote, so that would be some blind signatures, double envelope schemes, mixed nets, and whatever technical implementation is currently the most popular. They do guarantee the secrecy in a way that you just cannot reverse the process, cryptography based, and there will be independent audits. So apart from being open source, there will be organizations that will go there and check if the system deployed is actually the one that is on GitHub, etc., etc. What is the time frame? This Wednesday, the Council of Ministers will prioritize the e-voting project on the e-government roadmap. It was left for next or the year after that, but since the law is already in place, we have to prioritize and put it as a primary project. So that should start this year or at the end of or the beginning of next year. The project proposal is underway, so we should draft a small project proposal to get funding from the EU funds. And hopefully 2018 there will be pilots. Of course, we cannot go directly live with such an important thing as democracy. So there will be pilots across 2018, and according at least to the current text in the law, 2019 there will be a binding electronic voting election. So that's the roadmap at the moment, and it's going pretty according to plan for now. So what is left to be done? I said what we are doing, and everything is left. I mean, we basically laid the groundwork, but all the projects, all these upgrades of registers, all the communication, all the interfaces, all of that should be built now. The projects haven't yet started. The project proposals for 30 projects have to be submitted till basically the end of the year, and most of them will be. And next year there will be the tenders, and then maybe some delays because someone will try to appeal that some other company won. So possibly there will be delays. As I mentioned in the beginning, things are slow, but we will have them underway next year, which will be the implementation year, and this is when most of the oversight and control should happen, and this is when all of our requirements and all of our findings of problems that we're trying to solve we will see whether they are working or whether it's just some wishful thinking. What is our approach to that whole situation? Well, we are agile. We follow procedures, of course, but try to either shortcut them somehow or work directly with the people that are the motivated actors for a given process. So if you want something done, do not write an official letter. Well, do write an official letter, but also speak to the key actors in the process and say, okay, this is what we have to do, explain to them, and they'll sometimes understand. Surprisingly, there are pretty motivated people in the administration. Not too many of them, but still there are, and you have to identify them. There's a lot of multitasking. Obviously, all of these things and many more have been done by 3 or 4 people in the last 2 years. which includes going to parliament, explaining to MPs, going to working groups, writing documents at home, etc., etc. So we had to be multitasking a lot. And in terms of even legal text, it is mostly do-it-yourself. We do get some legal help from here and there, but we do it ourselves. And the motto, if I can say so, is that failure is only temporary. If something doesn't pass, or something doesn't happen the way we do immediately, that's just a temporary setback. A quick overview of what's in it for us. Everyone is asking, okay, why are you there? And there are some rumors, I have to share, that we are there for some alleged schemes and some briberies and stuff like that. That's not the case, obviously, because if it were, we would be quite bad at it. For 2 years now, there isn't a single project that we have procured, so there's not a single source of money from that. It's not the technical complexity. The technical complexity is significantly low, but it's about the challenge, and it's about the impact. And the impact is not only local, but through our implementations and through our policies, we can and do influence other European countries, and not only that. The other thing that's in for us is the diversity of tasks. In a regular business environment, you would just do some simple, well, not simple things, but some pretty focused things. While here, as I mentioned with the multitasking, you do a lot of different things and speak to a lot of different people. And it's an opportunity for out-of-the-box thinking. How do you solve this problem in a way that it doesn't break the law, but yeah. So I'm not sure if we're doing reform or we're just fixing broken windows, or whether fixing broken windows is actually a reform. Maybe if we fix all the broken windows, then they would stop breaking in the end and we'll have a reform done. And I still wonder, I mean, I hope we are doing a reform. As a conclusion, it is very important to have both the high-level overview and the implementation details. Because even previously, you can have a very great architect with some very great ideas and roadmaps and strategies and stuff like that. But when you go to the implementation detail, you see that, well, they do not have cache, and they don't have web interface, web services, and they don't have secure electronic identification because their protocols are broken, and it all falls apart, even though you had a pretty good strategy in mind. So we have the high-level overview, but we also go to the very technical details and write them in technical specifications so that things actually happen rather than be just good on words and on paper. We made some progress, tried to make sure it works in the long run. We laid the legal groundwork, as I mentioned. We're setting up the standards, the processes, the templates, everything like that. And more importantly, and which is why probably I'm speaking with OpenFest, is making everything open. So if everything is open, then even if we miss something, and even if we're not there to see that something is wrong, everyone in the community can. And that's the role of civil society here, to actually oversee the process. And I hope that these are indeed steps in the right direction in doing proper e-government, and in terms then having a better country even. Final slide, how to get updates. You can go to Facebook, facebook.com egovbg, and follow our official Facebook page. There's a discussion forum and the government repository, which doesn't have a dot there, but it's a misspelling, or just message me in some way. Thank you.
За съжаление нямаме време за въпроси, така че намерете Божо в коридора и си поговорете с него, със сигурност има какво да си кажете. Така, малко announcements. Тази година за пръв път имаме детска занималния. Бихме предпочели децата ви да бъдат над 3 години, защото не се знае колко ще реват. На втория етаж, като завиете по стълбите от централния вход, веднага ще видите, имаме разпръснати малко легота и разни други неща. Посетете workshopите, имаме супер интересни неща. Back to the past, forward to the past беше на Пешо workshop, много интересни неща. И минете да си вземете тениските, които сте си резервирали, моля ви, защото има много хора, които искат да ви ги вземат.